So today we're going to talk a little bit more about how to find revenue in this webinar via technology tips and tricks and innovations. But I want to set the stage in this conversation but by talking about some geopolitical events and also labor issues that we're all experiencing. So if you've been watching the news recently, certainly in the US, the White House has been prepping the American public for potential increased energy prices based on some of the goings-ons in Eastern Europe. I certainly think this might impact energy prices in Europe as well. So right when we were recovering from the pandemic, now we maybe are in the brink of a more difficult situation that certainly might have an impact on travel recovery. If it's expensive to drive or to fly, is that going to create more pressure on our industry? So that's a challenge that we're now facing that maybe we hadn't anticipated a couple months ago. What's also kind of interesting is that in terms of labor, the good news is that hospitality seems to be increasing its hiring. There's more and more people rejoining the hospitality workforce. So there's more bodies to help out. The bad news, at least for business owners and possibly revenue managers, depending on how you look at it, is that these workers are only being lured back by higher wages. It's a very competitive labor market out there in terms of hiring. So according to something I read on the Pace Revenue blog recently, there's a 7 to 10% growth in wages translates to a direct hit of 300 basis points to the bottom line. That's a significant amount of revenue to make up in a market where occupancy is really still suffering. So we're hiring more people. It's cost more money to get them in there, and our occupancy may not be sort of catching up because of larger geopolitical issues. So I think that we all know that revenue managers don't get paid just to price inventory. They're expected to be these alchemists who kind of come up with new magic spells to turn essentially what would be terrible fundamental metrics into what would be recovery revenue. The challenge is that, of course, as we point out, is that the variables have changed significantly over the last 2 years. And perhaps some of the tried and true methods of the past of 2019 and before are no longer applicable or need to be modified. So as an easy example, year-over-year booking data is not really tremendously predictable indicator anymore, because obviously a year ago, 2 years ago, the market was very deflated. So things are very different right now. Groups and meetings are starting to recover, but they haven't really caught up quite yet. Most city center, leisure transient we saw particularly over the summer, and hopefully this coming summer, the resorts were doing quite well. But in most city centers, leisure transient business is still down. So the question really is, facing all these predicaments, where are you going to find that extra revenue that you need? And the answer, I think, is in smarter technology tools. While hotels have been suffering over the last 2 years, the hotel companies have actually been doing a lot of R&D, and there's some new kind of magic tricks available to our revenue manager alchemists out there. So what we're going to be talking about today are smarter tools that can leverage data better, and hopefully you'll come away with some new ideas on what to do next. But first, before we get into it and into the questions, I'd like to go around the table and ask our panelists to do a quick introduction of themselves, and we'll start with Priya.
Hey, Paul, thank you so much. I am Priya Rajamani. I head onboarding and support for Stayntouch. Stayntouch is a cloud PMS solution that focuses on mobility and open API architecture and allows for ease of use, operational ease, all of that, which translates into some of the topics that you mentioned right now, being able to do more with smarter technology. So I have over 20 years of hospitality experience now, getting older by the year, but making it count. So thank you for that.
Thank you. Jos, we'll go to you next. Could you introduce yourself?
Thanks, Paul. My name is Jos Schaap. I am the CEO and co-founder at Roomdex. Roomdex is a application that or service that provides automated upselling, trying to optimize and maximize revenue between from when the guest has booked the original room to basically departure. So we're adding top line revenue during the course of the trip of the guest. Thank you.
Thank you, Jas. And then Jens, could you introduce yourself?
Yes, thank you, Will. Hi, everybody. My name is Jens Monk. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Pace Revenue. We are one of the leading innovators in revenue management platforms. So what previously used to be called RMSs, revenue management solutions, we call ourselves a revenue optimization platform, and we have innovated in a number of ways for revenue teams to help them be more efficient and to grow the revenue impact within their organizations. And I'll tell you a bit more about how we do that, but we've grown quite quickly from where we started in 2016 to now being just shy of 1,000 properties live, some notable names to the US, Sage, Lark, and others which people would have heard of.
Excellent. All right. Well, thank you very much. So let's get into it. Before I start with the first question, I just wanted to remind everyone that if you have any questions for the panelists, there is a mechanism in the webinar application where you can ask questions, and we will do our best to get to them as best we can. So yes, I'm going to come back to you and kind of start us off based on the observations of your customers and outside of what we all see in terms of lower occupancy due to travel restrictions or economic factors. How has the global travel market changed, and how permanent do you think these changes will be? And what are maybe temporary, like kind of what are you seeing from a market condition standpoint?
Yeah, it's obviously the $1 million question for travel. So I think there's a couple of components to it. So first is what have we seen over the last couple of years? And I think we've seen a huge amount of variability, both in terms of how over the seasons demand has been impacted, when it's been rebounding, but also how it's been different by country and region, urban, city locations, depending on where you've been. So a huge amount of variability that teams have had to deal with. But now going forward, I think the question you're posing is, to what extent are some of these changes structural?
Yeah.
And I think we wrote recently, we published some stuff around the Brian Chesky argument that we're facing the dawn of a golden age of travel. And the argument he's making there, in some ways self-serving, because Airbnb is not really catering towards corporate. But the argument is that there will be a systemic reduction in corporate travel, but that will be offset by an increase in transient travel due to the fact that we have more flexible workplaces, more hybrid lifestyles, and kind of work and leisure will blend and we'll be traveling more. And I think we broadly, from everything we're seeing on our side of the pond and with our customers, we've broadly seen a very strong rebound of transient. And I think corporate hasn't yet, as we pointed out, or groups rebounded in the same way. But I think what we've seen from our side is the Brian Chesky argument broadly holds true, but we think corporate will also rebound systemically. We haven't yet seen any signals to that being permanently diminished. But I think the tricky thing is we don't have the answer yet. We need more time, because I think we're still in the period where, and this will be the case for all of this calendar year, we will have a compensation for 24 months of not traveling. So it's not really until the end of this year that we think we will have a view on whether or not these changes have been permanent.
One of the things that we talked about lower occupancy, and so my question is, you can sit there and you can do all sorts of everything that you can try to do in order to acquire new guests, but right now there may be more of a focus on getting more from the guests that you can get. So I wonder if you talk a little bit about this concept of share of wallet or even customer lifetime value. What's your perspective here, and how does technology help improve a hotel's ability to get greater share of wallet?
Yeah. So first of all, I want to want to kind of connect back with your previous question that while demand has been impacted, we definitely see this kind of increased competition and need for technology and innovation to stay on top. So I think that's one of the situations we're dealing with, where there will be a kind of a clearer distinction between winners and losers, and there will be more of each, I think, going forward, depending on how you're executing, because I think the kind of supply ever outpacing or demand ever outpacing supply is no longer the case in hospitality. So that fundamental dynamics there has changed.
So you're going to see
sorry,
you're just going to see less of all boats rise with the tide, because the tide's not rising that high. So it's going to create more competition, right?
Yeah, exactly. And we think, you know, as an innovator, and I think this goes for many innovators in the industry, that in some ways that's actually good news, because that brings fresh winds into the industry and increases the pace of innovation and adoption. And we've seen this through M&A activity, we've seen this through reshuffling of teams, tightening teams. So I think in many ways those winds of change will be a good thing for the industry on the whole. And where people are looking, I think one of the starting points is efficiency, because teams are leaner everywhere. So that was one of the things that happened in 24 months, and I think that's the starting point coming out of the period where you don't have enough staff in operations, you don't have enough team in revenue or other functions. How do you effectively serve your customers and manage the business with fewer staff? So I think that's a period of time, but when you come out of that, then you start to again look at how do we actually have a commercial impact on top of being able to just simply operate, right? Because that's the starting point, and then you look at further efficiencies. And yes, what you point to with customer lifetime value, that's one of the big areas. So there are really a few buzzwords in the industry. One that we've talked about for a long time, there's 3 categories: total revenue, attribute-based pricing, and customer lifetime value. These have kind of been the buzzwords for a long time in the industry, and they're starting to come to fruition. I think specifically to the point of customer lifetime value, one of the reasons why that hasn't happened to date is that we really haven't had the coverage of data of an identifier for the customer. So we can't really do anything meaningful as an industry with customer data, customer lifetime, until we have this identifier across all of your transaction patterns. And that's now starting to happen with the growth of cloud PMS, the Stayntouch being a strong player there. Also the adoption of CDPs, so customer data platforms. Salesforce is one of those. And with those integrations, starting to kind of build something that can track you as a customer across your multiple purchases, which is not trivial at all, right? Because you may have a different credit card every time, you may have a different email address depending on whether you're working or traveling for leisure. So it's a hard problem to solve, but I think the data is starting to be there. And once we have enough coverage, we can start to then really do exciting things. And we're working with some of our customers. One of them is the student hotel on this particular area, where we're trying to be able to take the future into account and optimize not only for what's the most optimal product to sell now, but how do we take into account future revenue from that customer, and how do we kind of incorporate that into our modeling of how we should price today.
It's kind of like kind of loyalty on steroids, whereas where the identifier previously has been, oh, this person is a loyalty person, and then we're going to send them special rates or special offers. Now what you're saying is we can break this out. They don't have to be signed up for loyalty, and then we can create pricing, offers, etc., based on previous patterns that are not necessarily attached to just a loyalty program. Is that accurate?
Yeah, I think that's accurate. I think loyalty programs really have been, I'm going to be a little bit controversial, they've been fairly dumb reward systems, which rewards everybody equally for behavior. So if you do something well, you get a sweet effectively. But the customer lifetime value is saying not all customers are created equal. Not all of them will generate the same amount of revenue or be as impactful to me over the long term. And really, it should be the other way around. We should have started with customer lifetime value, and then we build loyalty schemes on top of that. And you can work out, how do I reward those customers? How do I incentivize them? And it should not be one size fits all, right? In order to incentivize you to come back, I may need to give you a free parking slot. In order to incentivize somebody else, I may need to lower the rate. So I think those things should be outputs of a deep understanding of what is the customer lifetime value and what are the drivers of that customer's behavior.
Cool. Priya, I want to kind of continue from the PMS point of view from some of your products in terms of this idea of capitalizing on total guest revenue potential. You have some self-service interfaces, whether it be like mobile check-in or a kiosk. How does that help increase the potential to capitalize on total guest revenue?
Sure, Paul. So I think once a guest is at the hotel, we're talking about some of these revenue management options being enabled at the time of check-in, controlling the price, what they get to select, micro-targeting some of those price elements prior to the guest's arrival. When we offer additional enablement options like mobile check-in or kiosk check-ins, you're actually extending some of the period of offering, even for when the guest arrives at the hotel or just pre-arrival is checking in at the hotel, and you're able to use these these platforms to engage the customer and give your service or product offerings beyond what has already been offered. So essentially, you're increasing the amount of products that you can put out there for the customer to consume, and letting them be the decision maker on what they want to consume. So we are seeing, of course, that hotels are moving into the mobility space primarily to tackle some of these staff constraints and to be able to enhance their operational delivery, to be able to do more with less. But in addition to that, engaging the customer while they're on site and kind of giving them a platform to make their selections of services and offerings, that's an additional incremental revenue potential then you're then maximizing with the guest being at the hotel.
Yeah, I mean, so I mean, I think what she's saying is, like upselling is kind of the key to share of wallet. Front desk upselling, manual upselling, non-kiosk has been around forever. And quite frankly, 15 years ago, we were sending out pre-arrival emails offering, hey, why don't you call and get a dinner reservation or something along those lines in advance of their check-in. But what's different about upsell automation, and how does it kind of better ensure that revenue managers can capture a greater share of wallet?
Yeah, it's a good question. So I think first of all, upsell at the front desk is there and will be there for a long time to come. I think it can also be very valuable if you have the right people working behind the front desk that are that know how to sell and that can sell. I find that a lot of quite a few front desk agents are not necessarily good salespeople, and therefore the upselling doesn't happen. But those that do can generate quite a few additional revenue at check-in when the rooms are available. I think when it comes to upselling in the future, if you look at today's technology out there that has been around for quite some time, most of those are connected one way to the PMS. All of them therefore have the need, or pretty much all of them have the need for the hotel to confirm an upgrade when the guest kind of requests one online. That slows down the process because of the one way. Usually the pricing is like set in the upsell system, and that reduces automation or kind of takes away the automation. It basically means that the upgrade that is being offered is static at any given time, which may, to Jens's point, everybody has a different view of things. Everybody has a different everybody likes to pay differently for certain things. Some people like to pay more than others. And when the price is static, that all gets ignored basically. So the success of an upgrade program that is not automated or semi-automated or manual is probably fairly limited. That's why I think we at Roomdex at least think that automation is the key, which basically means you have to have full two-way into the PMS to get all pricing information at any given time, to get all the details of the guest at any given time. And then you can really start playing with the pricing that you get. And a good upsell system is, of course, only a part of the entire guest journey. If the guest has booked the room, let's say 2 or 3 weeks in advance, it's the prices at that time being set by the RMS system. The guest buys a room at a certain price, and then as the guest gets closer to arrival, the pricing of that room may or may not change, or the next level room may change. Usually it goes up in normal days. Let's assume that continues to go up. That's an area where I think there is opportunity. If a guest books a certain room, let's say a couple of weeks in advance, they do that because they need to go to a city, either for leisure or for business, and their focus is primarily getting a hotel to stay in, and not necessarily always thinking about what they really want to get out of the stay. However, as they get closer to arrival, there are opportunities to make the guest aware of additional enhanced room features, additional enhanced guest services, anything that could make the guest stay more convenient and more interesting, and therefore an opportunity for hotels to generate more revenue. Guests in general don't mind paying for something if it perceives value for them. If they get something out of it, they don't mind paying. Simple example, when I was having a conversation with our sales team here, one of them is there's a local place here called Chops where you can buy salad for lunch, and it's a well-known chain here in the United States, and they have on their boards, when you go there, they have like 5 or 6 standard salads that you can buy for $8 or something. But you can also build your own salad. You build your own salad is always at least $11, $12, but you have the same size. It doesn't. It's the same size of food you're getting. It's just $3 or $4 more because you pick whatever you want. And seemingly, a lot of people don't have a problem with doing that because they want what they want, and therefore they pay $4 more. Take that back to the hotel, the same thing can apply. If you have a standard room booked and you get offered a slightly larger room with a nicer view, it's very enticing, especially when the difference is only showing to the guest. So let's say the $25 difference to buy that. It's even more enticing, I think, if that upsell price is somehow linked to what the guest originally paid for the room. A guest that paid, for example, $100 for a room is probably willing to pay $25 for an upgrade, but may not go to $50. So if you have static pricing, you're going to miss that opportunity. If you have flexible pricing that takes all of those things in account, as it relates to when the guest has already purchased a room until they arrive, then you talk real automation, and then you also talk more targeting towards the customer. And then that's, I think, a real opportunity to get upsell really being successful going. So that's on the pricing side. On the automation side, from the fulfillment point of view, I think that the opportunity lies into, and especially with all the clouds that are available, all the cloud PMS systems, the integration is much simpler, much easier, much faster, and often free of charge, which is really great. It allows hotels to get an upgrade system in place that A, can be switched on very quickly and very fast. B, once it's live, does not require the hotel to do anything other than counting the beans every now and then to see if it performs as they want it to perform. And it's kind of going back to revenue management, things that Jens already mentioned. A lot of these things are happening automated in automation. A lot of these things cannot be done by human calculating all these prices and all these setups as fast as possible. So the computer does everything for them. If a guest purchases a room upgrade, it gets posted into the PMS in all full details, and there is nothing they have to do. When the guest checks in, everything falls into place automatically. Payment happens. Life's good for everybody. So I think it's that type of automation that can really help, A, with the staffing constraints that are existing today, but B, with the overall guest satisfaction, because if there's a manual process involved that requires approval of an upgrade, that gets forgotten quite often, actually. And then when a guest arrives, there is no upgrade ready for him or her. So I think automation is key. And going back to some of the things that Jens mentioned in share of wallet, I think there's opportunity between booking the guest and the guest departing to sell more to the guest. While the guest doesn't have to feel, how do I say that, robbed of more money or something. Guests just, in general, people like to spend when they know they're going somewhere good and when they get an offer that makes sense to them.
Right. So Jens was talking about pricing, and so I want to like shift a little bit and talk a little bit about this core activity for revenue managers. A lot of that is kind of based on historical, is forecasting based on historical data. And as I mentioned, kind of year-over-year data is very difficult to rely on these days because it's like the enormous change in terms of what's happening in the marketplace. So do revenue managers need to approach forecasting differently, or maybe rephrase that, does revenue management software address forecasting differently in light of this uncertainty?
Yeah, great question. Forecasting is at the heart of revenue management, but I think we do a lot of challenging. I think everybody in this audience or panel does the same. You asked with Roomdex, Priya with Stayntouch, challenging orthodoxies. And I think the way revenue management has worked and the way hospitality has worked historically is we simplify. We simplify everything as much as possible because it's such a complex world. We're selling through multiple segments, multiple distribution channels, different price points, 365 days in advance. It's a crazy complex world. And we used to have Excel and maybe a couple of platforms that were available to us. What we would do is simplify. So we would say, let's use segments instead of room types. Let's use property. Let's use best available rate. Let's use buckets. Let's use advanced purchase rate. And most importantly, I think for what Jos was talking about, let's just bundle everything together on the point of purchase. But the problem with that is that it creates this huge amount of friction for the customer. It's not the experience they want. So the whole point of unbundling, to start with that, is to say, let's make the initial engagement I have with the product as simple as possible, and then upsell more as we go. And I think if you look online, if you try to book any airline ticket, that's exactly what they do. They show you a cheap, simple option. You basically put your card in, or everything's super fast, and your payment's completed. And then they start adding on ancillaries. But what often happens in hospitality is like everything is bundled into one. I have to choose everything in one go because everything's bundled together. Huge amount of friction, then more friction on payment and customer profile. So I think that's being done wrongly. And then when it comes to how we do revenue management, all of these simplifications, they really hold us down, and that goes to forecasting as well. We used to forecast on the last 2 or 3 years of historical data with no real understanding of uncertainty at the property level because we didn't have enough data. And that was just completely blown up by COVID because the historical patterns didn't hold true anymore. And the industry has really been between these two poles, using historical data to forecast on the property level or following your comp set. That being like a very unhappy marriage between those two. The compromise has been that you're not too embarrassed by the outcome, but it's not optimal either. So how we're approaching it is a bit different. We're following an approach called micro-targeted pricing. We mentioned this, where we are actually able to go in much deeper and have an understanding of what is the optimal price point for each product type, so each room type, for each day, each stay night of the next 365 days, and actually even each lead day, so each point in the lead time, and update all of this every hour. Now, going back to your question on forecasting and uncertainty, what makes this possible is an understanding of uncertainty. That's really key. And so to use a little bit of science here, this is in science terms called Bayesian statistics, or statistics that incorporate uncertainty. And the best explanation is really when we go back to the film Rain Man and he's counting cards at the blackjack table. The more cards you see, the greater certainty you have of what remains in the deck. The fewer cards you've seen, the less certain you are. And that needs to be baked into your model. The less certain you are, the less money you put on the table, right? The more certainty you have, the more risk you take. So that hasn't been incorporated historically, and that's one of the big changes with new platforms, of which we are one. This kind of going deeper in forecasting and pricing, and being able to do that with an understanding of uncertainty.
So,
Paul, can I just interrupt with a question to Jens on that pricing? Like if I think a little bit about upselling, what you're trying to do is basically get more money for slightly more set of square meters or square foot that you sell. Like traditionally, hotels really focus on I'm selling a room type, I'm selling a room, but that leaves a lot of square foot or square meters unused, for which you have to pay all kinds of fees or kind of debt. You know, it's like debt has already been paid for, but you can maximize the revenue based on square foot or square meters. Do you guys think in that way in some way? Do you try to maximize how much more can I get, regardless of what the room type is, out of a room? Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. It makes a lot of sense. That is really what the concept of total revenue historically used to just mean let's add ancillaries. But I think the most sophisticated customers we have are actually doing exactly what you say. They're starting to think of square feet or square meters as the available, that's what you're selling. And this is the concept that's now starting to really grow in the industry is you're selling a building. You're not selling single rooms and twin rooms. Your asset is a building. Now let's think about how should your building be configured. You have 10,000 square feet. You know, how do you allocate your rooms? And often that happens once, and the next 30 years it's the same. You can actually change that configuration by season, but you can't do that unless you have a data-driven approach. And that data-driven approach requires you to have quote unquote one KPI or one metric, which you can compare and contrast them with. RevPAR isn't a great one. So what people are starting to do instead is gross operating profit per square feet, per square meter. And the cool thing then is you can start to look at your segments, your room types, your channels by this one segment and actually say, hang on, I should maybe spend, you know, I should have some people reconfiguring some of my rooms, or I should at least consider for next year restructuring my inventory, where I should see if there's a flexible way in which I can, by quarter, by month, kind of restructure them. And I think that's a super interesting trend. Called hybrid, but our thesis there is that it's hybrid is no longer a fringe. Everybody is hybrid now.
Yeah.
What is that? Can you explain that? Can you explain that how everybody's hybrid now?
Well, I think everybody's hybrid in the sense that everybody already has revenue streams which are not only accommodation or room revenue. You have some ancillary spend, and it's not static. And to Jost's point, you know, upselling is such a beautiful thing that Roomdex is doing, because I guess one of the key reasons why it's beautiful for Jost that it's zero until Roomdex starts upselling, and every single sale is incremental, is per definition upsell, so you can prove it out. But to the point of it not being static, like you can grow those. So you already have ancillaries, you already have multiple room types, and you're having to evaluate which of them, what your configuration should be. So the fact that you may have, you know, one co-working space or one meeting room, it was already the case. You already had a configuration of rooms. So hybrid really just means that we're going away from a model where my room inventory is set in stone for all time. As soon as you depart from that principle, then you're hybrid. You're having to think about how should I configure my real estate.
Yeah.
Well, I think also, sorry, Paul.
Yeah, go ahead.
You also mentioned earlier the ABS. You know, that's another form, I think, of hybrids, whereby, you know, instead of selling a room type, you're selling something that's attractive to a guest, which ultimately may end him or her going into a particular room that has that interest. And that goes back to the Chops example I gave, whereby you can buy the standard room, for, let's say, $100, or you can buy some features that get the guest to pay $120, and you've consumed a few more square meters in your building, plus you've made $20 more with the same effort, more or less. And that's I think a direction both the revenue management and upselling or booking in general should advance into.
Yeah, I mean, I think in theory, if you have a presidential suite that is empty tonight, you know, the question really is, if you're concerned about, and the acronym I'm going to get wrong, but your gross operating profit per square meter, if that suite is empty tonight, could you really not have offered that for 10 euros more, $10 more, and put somebody in there by putting something in that somebody in that presidential suite for just a few dollars more, you are increasing your gross operating profit by per square meter, if I get that acronym correct. Is that would you say that's fair, Jens?
Yeah, I think I think that's a fair characterization. I think just thinking more creatively about what we can do with our inventory, and I'm not too close to the ground in the US, at least in Europe, and this may be interesting to a US audience. All of our customers were thinking creatively about their inventory during the pandemic. They were renting some of them out to local council or administrations. We had one customer actually turned all the rooms on one floor into entrepreneurial hubs. So they had a hairdresser in one of their rooms. Next door was a mini boxing gym for somebody who wanted to spend a month trying out if they could build a small business. And I'm not saying that that's a sustainable model for hospitality, but I'm saying that it's lit a few fuses under the creative ideas of how tightly wedded are we to our configuration currently, and when and how should we be reevaluating it. So I think that's a very interesting trend.
Yeah, how does that? Because you mentioned Paul mentioned the presidential suite, or let's say the higher end suites, and we're going live with a bunch of hotels, and we sometimes still come across this mindset of my high end suites are high end, so they're only being sold if people want to pay the high end price. Goes back to Paul's point, that means they're going to be empty most of the time.
Yeah.
And so how does RMS handles that? Because if I look at an airline, which the example you earlier mentioned, I mean, there's never this, the price is always different. It's never the same. It's hard to determine what is my high value seat in that place. But what they're aiming for is trying to fill up that plane, whether if they rather fill it with people that all pay 500 and maybe a few pay 550 than having a few seats empty. And I think the same philosophy should go back to the hotels. And the example, the argument we're hearing is, well, if we sell below the premium, then it becomes a commodity, and then people will always want to have it. But I think to me, it's like, whoa, I got lucky tonight because it's available and I can get it for a nice deal tonight.
You have a lot of repeat customers.
I think people are really attached to this idea that price is attached to value, but I think in every other industry we've seen that broken up. We had Groupon 10 years ago destroyed the idea that there was this strict connection and that you were devaluing your assets. So I think in every other industry we're used to, as consumers now, that you can get lucky effectively, and I think that's a great thing. And to what you're doing, Jos, with Roomdex, I think that's effectively using that additional inventory to exactly that, make people feel lucky. So I think what we, first of all, with these higher end inventories, we should never be at 100% occupancy on them. Why? Because if we do, we're selling too cheap. There's always going to be an element in risk involved, because we can never know exactly that on 3 days out we'll be able to sell this. So some of them will always be available. Otherwise, we're not taking enough risk. And that's an amazing upsell. That's an amazing upsell opportunity. And I think just using that upsell, if it's cheap, make people feel great. Don't make them feel like they're always, paying or being upsold. Make them feel like they're lucky. I think that's an amazing opportunity we don't always leverage.
Yeah, I agree.
Priya, I want to talk a little bit. We've been talking about like flexible kind of flexible selling, inventory management. I know that Stayntouch has some customers that are creative when it comes to that. I think that you all have a TWA and Mint House, Bode, I think is one of them. How are these hotels able to use the PMS to be more creative with their selling and the revenue strategy?
I think, both Jens and yours alluded to it in prior parts of the conversation. I think the key here is that they don't want to leave money on the table. The key here is that they're willing to be creative and leverage the technology that they have at hand to make or optimize their revenue potential. So, Jens spoke about using rooms not as traditional rooms, but as alternatives. And some of our customers that you named here, Mint, TWA, Bode, have been very, very creative in their thinking. So, they've been using as office spaces, as even F&B spaces, or spaces for having unique F&B experiences in this climate where everybody wants to kind of be more isolated, not be in a restaurant with a crowd and all of that. So they've kind of repositioned some of their configuration, again, speaking of what Jens spoke of earlier, to be able to make them spaces that bring in different types of revenue, even when the lodging industry in general was seeing reduced occupancy. So they were reconfiguring the same office, same room to become an F&B unique experience space, to become a unique office space, to become the next Zoom room, all of that, because people are still looking for those spaces, just in a different way. And the PMS technology that we offer allows you to be able to do that. So to leverage the technology to sell that. And talking about specifically functionality like day use rooms, which we are very much something that we offer and train and ask customers to use. The other thing, calling out TWA specifically, they're obviously an airport hotel. So one of the features that they use is hourly, which is again an hourly module. It's the ability to sell rooms in hourly slots and then price them or increase it or decrease the price based on whether you're staying the whole night, and so you then get an average rate. But if you're staying for 2 hours, how do you optimize those 2 hours to get that the customer just has that window to come into the hotel? So what price are you offering that to the customer, and then to kind of tie that in with the PMS to be able to service it. So this at Stayntouch, to do these hourly slots and break them into revenue offerings as well as service offerings to allow that to operate.
Yeah, it used to be that was just sort of an airport hotel model, but now it's kind of found an opportunity with this more creative inventory management. The PMS is absolutely like sort of the hub of everything that we're talking about today. That's the source of the data, is the holder of the reservations. So I think one of the most important revenue management features that you have in Stayntouch might be actually your zero cost of two-way integration with third-party tools. Can you talk a little bit about how you're kind of like you're empowering your hotels a little bit by letting them have best-of-breed solutions? And I know that you have something called the Stayntouch Marketplace. I'm not sure if that's a working name or not, working title or not. That's in the works. How does that kind of play into this concept as well?
Sure. And yes, that's a working title, but soon to be announced. And the key here is to make it easier for our customers. We spoke about making it a simpler offering. So what we offer at Stayntouch is essentially a PMS with integrations, over 1,100 integrations essentially, to be able to connect without any cost to these providers. So be it Pace Revenue with Jens or be it Roomdex with yours, we're able to go the whole route, give you micro-targeted, pricing if you require, be it through, when we spoke about Pace doing that micro-segmenting, that is what customers are now wanting. So then, as a PMS provider that gives you the ability to integrate with these vendors free of cost at no additional charge, is that essentially opening a world for them to then use to have an optimal revenue experience.
Yeah. I'm excited to see it when it's out and available as well. what I want to do is I want to like give everybody an opportunity to just say a couple words, maybe expand on some stuff that we haven't talked about. I know Jens, I think we've mentioned micro targeting pricing a little bit. Just a couple last sentences to kind of give some of these revenue managers who are listening today some excitement as they go away.
Yeah, I think the bigger picture for us is that revenue management is phenomenally exciting. I think that's kind of the headline for us. I think this discipline has effectively often been in the basement or kind of operational. And what it really needs to be, instead of being operational and considered a cost center, it needs to be a kind of data-driven organization that gets attributed revenue growth and actual commercial outcomes. And that doesn't sit next to sales and marketing, but sits, in parallel to sales and marketing and collaborates with them. So when we see that happening actually in the industry. So I think to all the revenue managers listening, try to kind of build your network, find people who are thinking in this way, and instill this thinking in your own organization, or find organizations where this thinking is happening. Because there is really just this phenomenal change between the revenue management of old, where you're producing manual reports in Excel and somebody's telling you that you should be 10% lower than the comp set, and you're implementing manual price changes everywhere, or where you are in this new world where you have automated tools and are a strategist discovering commercial opportunities and executing on them. I think that's a super exciting new world, and the platforms and tech are now available. I think if we go back 5-10 years, penetration of cloud PMS was incredibly low. We really only had a couple of platforms out there for revenue management. Yoast and Roomdex didn't exist. I think this is a golden age from a tech perspective, at least in hospitality. So I think we should really capture it.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Excuse me. Yas, in terms of just a couple last sentences in terms of upselling, automated upselling, and maybe a glimpse of what's coming down the pike.
Yeah, I just want to make a small correction to what Jens just said. I did exist a few years ago, but Roomdex did not. So. But in general, I would say that I think Jens kind of hit quite hard on the automation and let them do their thing. Data is all data-driven decisions that are thought through, that are worked out well, that can be monitored and have been adjusted. And the same I think goes with upselling. Switching on automated upselling, assuming it's really automated, and that's something you'd have to check as a revenue manager. That means that the fulfillment is like nearly, error or nearly not. It's like very easy to achieve, especially when you focus around room revenue, early arrival, late departure. If that's fully automated, there is no effort to generate additional revenue that way. That can easily add between 0.5% to 2% of revenue on top of your monthly, top line. That's basically that 1.5%, let's just say 1% to 2%. That is revenue that you would have otherwise not have had. It's also almost 100% margin because there is no additional cost really other than the very incremental cost of that maybe slightly larger room that needs to be cleaned. But for example, switching on automation of selling, early arrival and late departure with the key only when it's available, so you can fulfill on it, which is at Roomdex, we have a few tricks to enable that. That early arrival and late departure, for example, is 100% pure revenue, because whether you clean the room at 2 p.m. or 8 a.m., there's no cost difference there. But it gives the guest a real opportunity to arrive when they want to arrive, stay when they want to stay, and they'll be happy to pay for it. So, in line with what Jens said, focus on automation, get tools that help you generate more revenue while you can focus on overall strategy of the revenue, exercise as a whole.
Yeah, I mean, and I think it's absolutely a direct help with the labor issues that we're having, not just from an efficiency standpoint, but for the increasing cost in labor that the hotels have to pay. Priya, can you take us home? Just a couple last words for our audience before we end our webinar today.
Thanks, Paul. Yeah, I think circle back to the fact that you called out, wherein the PMS is essentially the base, the core of the whole platform. So go with a partner that allows you to have these integrations that give you the tech stack that you need to be able to have ease of use, ease of operations, being able to do the price optimization and all of that. So I think when this is, as Jens said, the golden age when it comes to tech stacks in the cloud environment. Let's leverage that. Let's act on it and make the right decision for ourselves.
Yeah, I agree. Well, thank you, everyone. Thank you to the panelists for coming today. We really appreciate it. And I want to thank all the audience for joining us today. As usual, this webinar has been recorded, and we will upload it to the Stayntouch website later today. And you'll receive a follow-up email with the webinar recording within about 24 hours. So if you have any further questions, feel free to reach out to us at info@stayintouch.com, and we will try to get back to you and answer those questions as fast as we can. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone. Have a great day.
And thank you all for hosting. Thanks, Jens and Priya.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.